From Eyewitness News, this is Newsmakers.
With the collapse of the pension settlement between labor unions and the state, a trial looms. Whatever happens in Superior Court will likely end up in the state Supreme Court. We break down the process going forward and the possible outcomes and what it all means for retirees and taxpayers. Our guest on the first half of Newsmakers, the incoming dean at the Roger Williams University School of Law, Michael Yelnosky. Then, is buying Newport Grand a good bet? A group of investors, including former Providence Mayor Joseph Paolino, think so, but only if Newport voters give them a green light to add table games. This week on the second half of Newsmakers, Joseph Paolino.
Welcome to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. Joining me on the panel, WPRI.com reporter Ted Nesi. Michael, welcome to the program and congratulations on becoming the next dean at the Roger Williams School of Law.
Well, thanks for having me, and thanks for the congratulations. I'm looking forward to it.
All right,
We're
gonna get our pensions on now. Have a big discussion on that because, as everyone knows, the police union voted down the pension settlement, so everyone is back in court. Basic question here, and I know it's a tough one, but what is your estimate on when Rhode Island might see an end to this drama?
I think it's going to be a couple of years. We've got a fairly extensive trial that we're looking forward to in Superior Court before Judge Taft-Carter. Hard to know exactly how long that's going to take and whether it will in fact start on September 15th as scheduled. And then there'll be an appeal, and that's going to take some time. So it wouldn't surprise me at all if we're still talking about this a couple of years from now.
So everyone expects this case to end up in the Supreme Court based on that appeal, and that, you know, a lot of people think the justices will just vote the law up or down, but it might not be that simple. What are some of the potential outcomes out of the High Court?
Yeah, let me just say one thing before I answer that question. I mean, it is possible, I suppose, that this case could settle again during the course of the trial or pending the appeal. But if we do get to...
Because one settlement collapsing doesn't preclude doing a different settlement later?
No, and I think, you know, who knows whether the police officers will decide on reflection after seeing how this trial goes that maybe they want to revisit, assuming that the settlement was still on the table, want to revisit that vote. But if we do end up in the Supreme Court, I think there are a number of ways that the case could be resolved that wouldn't be necessarily clean, all up or all down. One, I think the basic divisions on the question of whether there is a contract that's entitled to this constitutional protection is the division between the retirees who have fully performed on whatever obligation they owed the state.
Meaning they're done working.
They made their contributions, they're done working, they held up their end of the bargain. I think they have the strongest case for constitutional contract protection. I think the case for the active employees, even though the group of active employees is limited to the group with 10 years of service, vested service, I think their case isn't quite as strong. That's a possible divider. I think another divider could be the amount of impairment of the various
So when you say divider,
rights.
you're saying that the Supreme Court could make a decision for one group and different for another?
Yeah, I think they could say there is a contract with respect, let's say, to the retirees because of this full performance issue. Maybe there isn't a contract, an enforceable contract under the contract clause with respect to individuals who are still working, maybe with respect to individuals who are still working prior to the date that they could have retired as opposed to after the date that they could have retired. So the contract issue isn't perfectly clear. And then I think on the issues that remain that Judge Taft-Carter will have to litigate and that will ultimately be before the court, there are other places where the court might slice and dice depending upon the justification for various provisions of the law, the frozen COLAs, the increased retirement age, et cetera. I don't think it's a homogeneous piece of litigation.
Could something make it so that the justices send it back to Superior Court?
I guess that's possible if they were to determine that Judge Taft-Carter perhaps applied the wrong test It wouldn't be unusual for a court to say, we're not going to apply the test in the first instance because you developed the factual record, and maybe it was developed in a way that's not consistent with the way we think contract clause analysis
And the only
should
people
go.
to be happy about that, of course, would be the lawyers.
Yes, yeah, and the state, I'm told, is already $500,000 in at this point in lawyer and actuarial fees. So this is going to, what would be also very hard for me to predict is how much this is going to cost.
You kind of alluded to this earlier, but how likely is it that the trial on the pension case actually starts September 15th as currently scheduled in Superior Court?
It's hard for me to know because the gag order was so successful. I just don't know how much of the pre-litigation work was really done during the course of the mediation, getting the actuaries lined up, sort of previewing the testimony that will take place at trial. Assuming that that is what was happening in the mediation, that the parties were getting prepared to try the case if necessary, I guess September 15th is a possibility. But it wouldn't surprise me at all if one or both parties ask for an extension.
What do you make of, we've had a number of rulings from Judge Taft-Carter that went into the law, under the legal theories undergirding all this. And we had in 2011, she said, as you've referenced, that there is an implied contract between the state and the pensioners because they did the work and they promised this retirement benefit. And just recently, she again went back to that in denying a motion to dismiss this. So do you think, do those suggest that it's open and shut? Taft-Carter, is going to side with the retirees and it's just a matter of time till she lays down the final decision?
I think that's not clear. As I read the opinions, she has made up her mind now on the contract issue. That is, whether there is some contract that's entitled to constitutional protection from legislative impairment. But the test for whether a legislative impairment passes constitutional muster is a fairly detailed test. She refers to it in great detail, actually, in the summary judgment case in the 09-10 pension litigation. And she says this test is intended to give the legislature some freedom to respond to changing economic conditions. So I don't read her opinion at all as sort of a breezy, this is an easy case, they messed with these contracts and they're not allowed to mess with these contracts. My own view is she's going to put them to their proof, and I'm not convinced that she's going to give a ruling either at all to the union or certainly exclusively to the union. I think that remains to be seen.
Based on her ruling with the motion to dismiss, it's pretty clear that she thinks there was an implied contract here. This conversation's been dominated by that. So at least in the Superior Court level, is the real kind of clash going to be over whether or not the state had other options here, that things were in dire straits, so this is what we had to do? I mean, aren't the unions going to say, hey, we had other options? We could have raised taxes. We could have re-amortized or remortgaged the pension debt. Is that really where the battle's going to come down in Superior Court, you think?
I think so. The last prong of this constitutional test is, was the state's justification sufficient to overcome these impairments of the contracts? And you can hear it sort of in the rhetoric out there. On the one hand, the treasurer says, we identified a problem, a serious problem. Everybody agrees there was some underfunding, some significant underfunding. We had a special legislative session. We studied the question very closely, and we came up with a comprehensive solution. That should be enough. The opponents of the law say, of course, there are other options. You don't have to save all this money at once. The unfunded liability is based in part on actuarial assumptions that are subject to second guessing. The rate of return that you're going to get on this pension investment also factors into the unfunded liability, and therefore how dire the circumstances were. So, yeah, I think all those questions are going to be in play, and what's really interesting is there's not clear law, I don't think, in Rhode Island or really elsewhere on how closely the court will scrutinize those justifications.
So this will be precedent-setting either way?
Absolutely. The Colorado Supreme Court is hearing a case on June 4th that involved actually a very similar situation, freezing of retiree COLAs. They may get to this before. In fact, I think it's quite likely they're going to get to this before the Rhode Island Supreme Court does. But this is a national issue, as you all know. The New York Times has been following this, the Wall Street Journal. This is happening everywhere. There's not a lot of precedent, and Rhode Island's going to set some precedent, but it's going to have to figure out some issues first about how closely the judiciary should second-guess the legislature under this impairment of contracts provision of the Constitution.
Right now, the law is the law. It's being implemented, it's in place, COLAs aren't being paid, etc. So we know what happens if the law stays in place. If the justices decide this entire thing was unconstitutional, what happens? Does the state have to mail checks the next day? I mean, what follows from a major, because you've said yourself that the state needs to think about what to do in an adverse situation. So what is $4 billion in checks out the next day? That's not how it works, but you know what I mean. What do we have to do as a state?
Yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of knots to untangle here. Back pay of various kinds, some kind of front pay to compensate employees. Maybe again, after a judgment, another settlement that resolves how we're going to execute this. A ruling in favor of the unions here, in whole or in part, will present some really complicated remedial issues.
Will there be damages too on top of paying? We assume they have to pay the pensions if it's upheld, but will they have to pay damages to the retirees for putting them through all this?
No, that's not my understanding of the claims that have been brought.
You are Dean Designate
I
of
am.
the Roger Williams University School of Law, and you become Dean
July 1st.
July 1st. Again, congratulations.
Thank you very much.
And we've been talking a lot about pensions. We hope that you will come back so we can talk about your vision for the university and for the School of Law specifically.
I'd love to do
Good.
that.
You're not going to say no on live
Anytime.
television then? That's good. That's good to know.
Absolutely, I appreciate it.
All right, and with time running out here on the first half, I did want to take a moment to thank Danny Sarazin, who has directed Newsmakers for a number of years. She's moving on to less wonky pastures, if we could say. As a matter of fact, she's moving out of New England. We've always felt like we've been in very safe hands on Newsmakers. So Denise, thank you very much. And you can hit the music now because we are going to commercial. When we come back, the Newport Grand Gamble. Our guest is developer and former Providence Mayor Joseph Paolino. Stay with us. You're watching Newsmakers. Welcome back to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. To my right is WPRI.com reporter Ted Nesi, and we welcome to the program for the second half developer and former Providence Mayor Joseph Paolino. Joe, I think in my 7 years of hosting the show or so, this is the first time I've had you on the program.
The first time, it's nice.
I know, I'm surprised, and I apologize.
But you probably did it with his dad, right?
Yes, I'm sure you did. Let's talk about Newport Grand.
Sure.
Massachusetts, full steam ahead with 3 pending resort casinos. They already opened a slot parlor not too far away. Twin River has expanded. Not even to mention the Connecticut casinos have been up and running for a while. What made you look at Newport Grand and say, hey, there's some real potential here when there's such saturation in the market for this?
A few things. One, there's only one Newport. Newport is an international city. It's got a brand in itself. It's a beautiful city. If this was in any other community, I don't know if I'd be that interested. But because it was Newport, it was a good interest for me. Secondly, I want to get ahead of the steam of what's going to happen with Foxwoods. You're right. That's scary, what's happening in Massachusetts. And if they build
You're talking about Foxwoods in Fall River, right?
Wow, $1 billion in Fall River and Route 24. The way that place is now, I think if Foxwoods gets built and if table games are not voted on by the Newport voters, my prediction will be that Newport Grand will be closed within a few years. Just look at their revenues in the past. At one time, the state of Rhode Island was receiving close to $50 million in taxes from Newport Grand. Today, it's around 25, 26 million.
But Joe, some people are going to say that is inevitable. No matter what you do to Newport Grand, Foxwoods is a resort casino. There's no way
Tim,
Newport Grand will be able to keep up with that.
But it's going to be zero. They'll be closed. They'll be out of business. You're going to have 200 people out of work. You're going to have all the additional people that could get jobs out of work. You're going to have all the businesses that work with that facility today will not be working any longer there. You're going to have a big warehouse that will be empty. So no, I think if we can get this thing going now, give it a facelift. Number one, keep it in the location that it's in. They had rumors that they were going to put this on Bellevue Avenue or the waterfront, which is all
that
crazy.
would never have happened.
Never
In the
happened.
breakers, yeah.
And the only reasons, one of the reasons why we're really interested in it is because Mrs. Hurley, who owns that facility, she spent, people don't recognize this, in 2007, 2008, $28 million inside fire code, building code, keeping all the disability up to code. The inside is probably one of the safest buildings around. The other thing is that we're local developers. What Mrs. Hurley was always concerned about were her employees. She said, Joe, I don't want some Las Vegas company coming in here, buying us up and not caring for my employees. And we're from Rhode Island, we're from Newport.
Were there a lot of nibbles for Newport Grand? Were there Vegas casinos knocking down the door?
I think you have seen people that have been nibbling. And I got into this because, quite frankly, I was talking to another group, just as a real estate broker, seeing if they would be interested in maybe partnering or doing something there. And then the more I got involved in it, I said, gee, maybe this is something, if I could put some partners together, it would be good. So I think there's a lot of jobs that can be saved there, and I think there's more jobs that can be brought there. And we're talking about doing a $40 million facelift on that building. We want that to look like a Monte Carlo. Look, this will never be a Foxwoods. This will never be a Mohegan Sun. There's not enough land to make it. And quite frankly, as a Newport resident during the summer months, I don't want to see it like that. But to have it like a Monte Carlo, something very attractive, because right now, you drive over the Newport Bridge, you see this old warehouse. You know, it was never built for a casino. It was built to be a high-life front town.
Right.
And now to try to transition it, you have to spend a lot of money on the outside. Get rid of that ugly sign that says slots and make it into something very special, inviting. And don't let it just be a casino. It's going to be a place of entertainment. Bring some music. Maybe Billy Joel will sing there. Bring a Jimmy Buffett there. Put together a good health spa there. Have some gaming. You got gaming there now. It's just a different form of gaming.
I covered the campaign. Diane Hurley obviously tried in 2012, along with when Twin River was, to get Newport voters to approve this. I had her and John Taylor from Twin River on executive suite. She made the case you're making. It was jobs. It was what do you think will be different just 2 years later if you get this on the ballot this fall for Newport voters?
The three things that I said. Number one, I think the place will be out of business if Foxwoods gets built. Two, that you have local investors that are here that are all part of the community, and I think that's extremely important. Three is we're making a pledge that this place is never going to be moved. But the big threat at our heels, Foxwoods. That's the big difference, what's happening in Massachusetts.
But isn't that the big state threat? I mean, you right now have to convince the voters of Newport. Forget about everybody else. Forget about the folks at the General Assembly who are wringing their hands about the loss of revenue because of Massachusetts casinos. And there's a very strong faction in Newport that would be okay with the Newport Grand closing.
That's correct. And some people don't care about the jobs. They'll say those aren't kind of jobs we want in Newport.
I don't think they say that. I think there are other opportunities.
Quite frankly, they have.
Put something else there.
Quite frankly, they have said that. And I'll tell you that we are going to have a disagreement, but we don't have to be disagreeable. And I will speak to all of the potential people who have questions on this, and we'll try to answer them and tell the truth about it. But those jobs are very important. Very important. And the new jobs that can be brought there are very important. And we're going to put together a program to give jobs to Newport residents first. And we want to make sure that any new jobs that come up there, Newport residents will have a first priority for those jobs.
Joe, we had to ask a couple other things while we have you because
I figured you would.
So first and foremost, I'm going to give you an easy one that you get a lot these days. Is Buddy Cianci going to run for mayor?
I don't know the answer to that. I hope he does.
I think you do know the answer to that.
No, I don't, because I don't think he's made up his mind yet. But we do talk about it a lot.
Okay.
And I hope he does run, because
Why?
I think Mayor Tavares, I think, did an incredible job during the 4 years he's been mayor. He took over a city with a $110 million deficit that really wasn't getting much done. And quite frankly, I want to see him become governor because I want a mayor, somebody who understands local problems in Pawtucket or Central Falls or Providence, Woonsocket, or any other community in Rhode Island. Somebody who understands the local stuff.
All right, that's a good pitch for Mayor Tavares.
No,
what about Buddy Cianci?
Yeah, but I'm going to get to Buddy in a minute. But I'm going to tell you why. Because Cicilline, and I wasn't a big fan of his when he was there. He unfortunately for him, he took the brunt of cuts from Governor Carcieri when he was mayor, and he lost between $10 to $15 million in local aid. All right, and Carcieri tried to balance the budget, the state budget, on the backs of the city of Providence and other cities. Angel Tavares won't do that. He understands those problems. And I think if he's there, and then with a new election for mayor, I want somebody who's going to hit the ground running. Now, people know the good things and the bad things about Buddy. We even know about his health. We know everything about the guy. There's nothing your station, the newspaper, anybody can tell you about Buddy. We know it all. But we also know this. We know that he's smart. We know that he has vision. We know that he has the basics of how to run a local government, keep your streets clean, fill the potholes, plow the snow, have safe streets, have a good police department, change the skyline of the city, get into the neighborhoods. We know he knows how to do that. And we also know this. He knows how to fight for the people of Providence. And we need a mayor who's going to be in that state house that the governor and the legislature are going to say, we don't want to hear from Buddy on this one.
Well, you are obviously talking to him about it, and you're saying you don't know what he's going to do because he hasn't made up his mind yet.
That's correct.
When's he going to make up his mind?
When's filing deadline?
Late June.
Probably then. Probably then. I think right now, what I tell him, your health is the most important situation. We can still continue talking about this, but he clearly knows what he wants to do in the city. I mean, when you look at India Point Park today, it's very beautiful, isn't it? But you know how that happened? There was a scrap metal in a junkyard there back in the 60s and 50s. And in the 70s, between the Dorley and the Cianci administrations, working with Mrs. Sharp, they beautified that area, got rid of the junkyard, and they made a park there. What happens when we drive up Allen's Avenue, or really 95 coming into Providence? You see ugly scrap metal yards. Quite frankly, that was done not by the Tavares administration, but the previous one before him. Never should have done it. Never. It's ugly. It's terrible. We don't need scrap metal yards there. When Cianci was in office, he talked about doing a 3 cities plan, developing the Allen's Avenue area. That could be a tremendous expansion of what 195 is being talked about.
Okay, we've talked a lot about Buddy Cianci. I want to just for a second get back to Newport Grand.
Sure.
If the tolls on the Sakonnet River Bridge become permanent, would that hurt Newport
Yes,
Grand?
absolutely. Why would anybody want to drive by 24, go by $1 billion casino of Foxwoods, pay a toll on the Sakonnet Bridge to go pay and not have a full casino in Newport, but just slots? Why would anybody do it? That's why it will close.
But if the General Assembly decides to go forward with making them permanent, are you going to pull out of Newport Grand?
No, I won't do that. But if table games don't pass, we will, because we're going to make a major investment there, and there's a lot of jobs at stake here, a lot of construction jobs going to be at stake, permanent jobs, a lot of ancillary jobs that's going to be at stake here. And there's a lot of revenues. The people in Newport receive over $1 million a year there. Quite frankly, if table games are passed, I think they should get a part of that too.
Joe, you were one of the earliest people wringing your hands about what was going to happen with the Superman building in downtown Providence. I actually am curious, would you ever consider buying it if the current owner puts it on the market?
Only if there was a tenant there would I ever consider that, because...
So you think empty, it doesn't sell?
If empty, quite frankly, we can't afford to stand by to see that place empty, because that's depressing all the values in downtown. And if all the property owners in downtown want to go to court and say that our properties have been devalued because of that building, they would win, and you would see less taxes going into Providence. So it's to everybody's interest to get that, either apartments or if a single user ever came by. I don't think you'll see it as a regular office building, but you might see, when I was at economic development, there would be from time to time, when I headed that agency, there were companies that said, gee, we need 300,000 or 400,000 square feet. Do you have anything existing out there? This could be a tremendous marketing tool for the state and the city to use, that if that one user comes by, and by the way, it doesn't happen every day, but you never know, one could come by, and if it did, at least you have the facility to put them in.
And do you think the deal that's been, I mean, the concern on the voters' part, especially after 38 Studios, and I know they say how different this is that a bad deal will be put together and the developer will get a great windfall on the backs of the taxpayers?
You can't blame the people for having a very severe hangover from Studio 38. That has poisoned, I think, economic development in this state for many more years to come. It has poisoned them. And you can't blame the legislators for being gun shy, because they don't want to see that happen again. That was wrong what happened back then. But when you're looking at, if they're talking historic tax credits, I don't think anybody wants to see $75 million. But should a building that's 10,000 square feet get a $5 million cap, which is on the books now? And should you only limit a building that's 400,000 square feet, only get $5 million also? because quite frankly, you got maybe 10 buildings in that building with the amount of square feet. So I think there has to be something that everybody could agree on that's somewhere in the middle.
We have about a minute left. I've done some reporting on Connecticut casinos putting liens on homes in Rhode Island for people who have outstanding debts there, and some experts say that's an aggressive tactic. Twin River has filed legislation to be able to issue markers, those short-term debts, loans. Would you want to see Newport Grand have the ability to issue loans if you get table games?
I haven't heard about that legislation. Quite frankly, I don't know enough about it. At this time, it's above my pay grade, but I will study up on it.
Okay, so what if it were passed, and real quick, what do you think about the ability for casinos to put liens on people's homes?
Well, I don't like liens on people's homes. I don't think anybody but a government or the IRS or somebody like that. I don't think some gaming house, I don't care if it's, I don't care what facility it is, they shouldn't have the right to put a lien on somebody's home.
Joseph Paolino, thank you so much for joining us on the program. If you missed any of it, it's online, WPRI.com. For Ted Nesi, I'm Tim White. We'll see you next week on Newsmakers.